following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello again. Legislative update number 4, I believe. And we had 2 session days on the February 24th and 25th where we got a lot of bills done, which we'll go over. But first, before I start on that, is on my House Bill 135, which was the bill that we had a video on some months ago on the water pollution problem. That passed Judiciary by a vote of 12-9. It was amended, though, by only 2 years of paying the water bill. Okay, but the problem is there's going to be a fight on the House floor, but I'm working behind the scenes, offline, to find out what's going on with the bill. Some people are for it, some against it. I'm trying to find out why. Anyway, so on February 24th and 25th, we met at the the Bedford Sportsplex in Bedford, and a big gigantic room. It was kind of hard to keep things under control, and you probably heard some of the dramatic things that happened. But anyway, we'll go through some of this. First of all, the consent calendar, which was amazing. I think in all my years being there, nothing was actually pulled off the consent calendar. So everything, if you go to the February 19th calendar online, all the bills, they're either passed or failed, depending on, it was ought to pass with amendment and all that. So nothing got pulled off. So everything is going as it says. Okay, then we went to Wednesdays, part 1. Now, part 1 was supposed to be mainly all the bills that have to be done. Those are the bills, a lot of them going to second committees. In other words, going to finance, or going to ways and means, or going to another committee. So those had to be done. And that's why it was separated into part 1 and part 2. One of the bills, but that's something I want to show you right now, if you notice, because I'm going to go over what happened, and you probably heard it on the news. If we go to part 2, notice it at the same date, Wednesday, February 24th, regular calendar, part 2. So what happened, we finished part 1, and when we started part 2, as the calendar said, it was asked that HB 233 be special ordered to be first. Now, a special order was anybody can do that. They can make a motion to special order a bill to specific time or date. At that point, the Democrats got all upset and said that's supposed to be for tomorrow. Now, the calendar, you can clearly say February 24th. The news even reported it that they left because it was supposed to be tomorrow, because the news is not doing their job. They're just repeating what people tell them. Okay, anyway, so at that point, there was a mass exit by the Democrats. Even though the doors were supposedly locked, they just pushed their way through. Now, that happens pretty much every year nearly. There are deadlines and things have to be done, and the speaker can lock the doors. I mean, last year, for example, we were there from like 9 o'clock in the morning, I think it was in April, 2 years ago, until 4 o'clock the following morning. Okay, so you can go to the bathroom and that's it, But being in the sportsplex, it was kind of hard to close the doors. The problem is you have to keep a quorum of 2/3. So that's like approximately 240 people. If it gets below that, then that's okay as long as you have more than 200 people. Then you have to, but the problem is you have to then get 2/3 of a vote to pass or fail. Okay, so that happened. But we'll go through the bills first. So just to explain to you what happened and fix what you heard on the news, because I turned on the news next morning and the news said the Democrats left because they did a bill that wasn't supposed to be done. No, that was wrong. Anyway, on Wednesday morning, okay, we'll go back to some of the bills that went through. Okay, and you can look at some of these others, just go through. In education, that was House Bill 96. That was for, the motion was to kill it, inexpedient to legislate. Okay, that was a bill establishing the office of school counselor at the Department of Education. And I wrote the what we call the blurb on there, saying this position existed in 2018. The department decided to drop it. It shouldn't be our job to tell any department who they must hire and what they must hire. The Department of Education has a big budget, federal and state. So, and if they think they need the position, then they should budget it. Okay. HB 594, which I'll cover next, is building aid, which we're all concerned about. This changes the law a little, and the thing is, this bill was amended to be nothing like the original bill 594. So don't look at 594 because that was so convoluted it was anything. But the amendments are all on this calendar, so you can find them. But anyway, it basically says making building aid no less than 50 million. It used to be no more than 50 million. We're changing it to no less than 50 million. Now this has got to go to finance, and finance can make it less or more. But the problem is, remember, we have, I mentioned this before, we have 30 million is needed to pay off the bond that was done in 2008, which was a problem. That's why we don't have building aid today. Then we have House Bill 613. Now this is kind of interesting for those catastrophic aid. Now catastrophic aid is when a school district, for somebody comes into the school district or they're in the school district and they have to, for special education, they have to go to a off-site, to another place or whatnot. And if the cost of that right now is 3.5 times your regular cost of a child's education, then the state will pay up to 80% of what's over that. What this bill did, it changes it to 2.5 times, so hopefully, and the school districts can establish an insurance plan with other school districts in the area and a risk insurance pool with other districts. So if somebody moves, especially mainly for small towns, even like Litchfield, but other smaller towns, if somebody moves into your town and they need massive special ed costs, then having a risk pool insurance plan should hopefully cover that. But also moving the number down to 2.5 times rather than 3 should help school districts. Okay, then we'll go to House Bill 481. You can skip over these. I should have put down what that was in. Where's 481? 481 in Judiciary. This bill, we've tried this a few years ago, but it passed finally. And it's establishing the Office of Right to Know Ombudsman and making an appropriation therefore. In other words, if you want to know what your school board did or what your selectmen did in the Right to Know hearing, and they say you can't because it's subject to this bill law or whatever, you can argue the point or take it to court, which costs you money. So in some towns, they've had problems with this, and somebody was always taking the selectmen to court. There's gives you an ombudsman in the Secretary of State's office, I believe, that you can go to, and they'll look at it and say, yes, you're right. They have to tell you, or no, and it could save you money if you want to find out what's actually happened at a particular hearing, that they said was private. So anyway, and that's sunsets in 2 years unless we redo it. In other words, let's see if it works, what we're talking about. Then the big bill, one of the big ones, HB 625, that's protection of fetal life, and that just says no abortion after 24 weeks unless a mother's health is at jeopardy. That passed OTP. Initially, it came in as inexpedient to legislate. That was overturned, and it passed, then another vote for ought to pass, and that passed 191 to 160. Okay, so that's going to go off right to the Senate because it was determined that it didn't need to go any further than that. Okay, House Bill 580, Labor 590. Okay, mandate relative to paid sick time. This was the bill. It was inexpedient to legislate, which we voted. 202 to 148. This says pretty much every company's got to give you paid sick time. That's a negotiating item when you apply for a job or a union thing. It's not. Let's not do away with everything that you negotiate for a job. So that inexpedient to legislate 202 to 148. If you notice, if you look at these numbers, there's only 350 people there. Okay, we have probably 395 or so. I mean, some people called in sick and whatnot, but or business and what. But 350. So it's probably like 40 legislators that weren't there. Okay. Municipal and county, 586, which we've covered in the past sometimes ago. This is the one for zoning, and pretty much swings the pendulum to favor land developers. So it was tabled, which means it wasn't going to be voted on. We voted to table it. Initially, it was put on to special order to the second day, which was fine. But then on Thursday, it was voted by 3 votes to table it. At the end of the day, in the early afternoon on Thursday, they made a motion to take it off the table, but that failed. So it's still on the table, or what I like to call it, under the rug. Because a lot of times, things on the table never seem to get off the table. They'll probably make a motion to do this again in April sometime to take it off the table, but we'll see what happens. Another good bill, though, that did, where is it? Oh, in science and technology. This is one of those committees that it sometimes gets cumbersome to figure out what they're doing. But this bill, when you look at your electric bill, there's a fee in that electric bill, like a tax for renewable portfolio standard. This bill allows towns and municipalities in the state not to pay that fee. They're no different than your police departments and fire departments and other states do not pay state sales tax, state gas tax. Okay, so this is similar to that. And it should help your tax rate, depending on how much that is for the electric bills. So that hopefully will work. Again, that bill has to go to finance, and that finance will decide yes or no, are we going to do that? Okay. Then, so those are a lot of the bills that we covered. The regular calendar part 2, we didn't get too far on this because Again, we have troublemakers this time on the Republican side. They decided they wanted to do some hearings on something or other and took forever, and they wanted to limit debate. And sometimes if you want to limit debate, you need to do that at the very beginning of the thing, because if you try to do it in the middle of a session, then what happens is people are going to argue, they try to amend it, and you spend more time wasting time trying to limit debate than if you just did the bills. But, there's always somebody. Okay, HB 81, I believe was tabled. Wait a minute, yeah, I should look at my sheets here. Okay. Okay, yeah, on election law, House Bill 121 establishing independent redistricting commission, that was killed 198 to 158 because of time by the time this it was vetoed the last 3 years and 2 years, and it wasn't going to happen again. And New Hampshire's kind of hard to gerrymander. I mean, especially the state legislature with its 500 of us, and pretty much what the Constitution says, it's every town of, we'll say whatever it comes down to be, say 3,200 people have to have one rep, 6,400 have 2 reps, like Litchfield is, 8,200 people, something like that, so we have 2 plus, and that's where we have the Floterials with Mark McLean and Ross Berry from Manchester, 2 wards there, so to even things out. So it's kind of hard to even that, to, do that. So anyway, that failed. Also, for some reason it passed creating an animal records database, and you can read to see what that does. Also passed was relative to death benefits for first responders who died from suicide. Again, that I have to look at why, because, firemen and police, if they see something disastrous, it might cause them to think about it or do it. Okay. Okay. We covered those. Okay, back to, so here now we're on Wednesday. So we tabled the bill for, like I said, on 586, because that was special ordered. House Bill 81 on criminal justice was relative to the justified use of deadly force upon another person. That was tabled. There's something wrong with it. It needs to look at it. The problem is we have a lot of laws on our books that was still there prior to, and they haven't been changed, to when our New Hampshire Constitution was changed back in 1982 or something like that, about you can use deadly force to protect yourself and property. It's not an old law, it's a new one, new constitutional amendment, but we still have some old laws that say you can't do that. So anyway, so that's going to be tabled, and basically it's going to be looked at again because there were some problems with it. Okay. Another bill relative to use of deadly force in defense of another. In other words, you can protect other people. That passed. There's one bill trying to give peace officer status to federal law enforcement officers. That was inexpedient to legislate, and it was kept that way. In other words, we don't want DEA, FBI, or whatnot just acting like regular policemen in your town. They do it with the policemen. Okay. Okay, another one on education, House Bill 110. This is a minor bill. Instead of the money, right now, when you pay your taxes, it goes to your town clerk, and the town clerk then gives it to the school board, your school department. And this just makes sure that. Now, good one, relative to the release of student assessment information and data. The problem now, in some cases, you take the state assessment test, and the parents in some towns, I don't know about Litchfield because I don't have any kids or grandkids anymore in school, the assessment is should get to the parents before the end of the school year, so the parents can work with the kids on stuff they need work on. So this makes it clear that they will get that data. And 194 is similar. So it's those passed, and hopefully, I don't know if Litchfield has a problem with that, but if they do, they won't. You'll get your data before. House Bill 242, relative to the content of adequate education. That was 198 to 149. That changes a lot of what should be in an adequate education. Anyway, so we'll see what happens with that when what the Senate does to it and whatnot. But it fixes some things and really needs to look at what it does. A good one here, House Bill 320, requiring a civics competency assessment as a high school graduation requirement. The problem with that, you've seen things on television where somebody goes and asks even college kids, what are our 3 branches of government? They're clueless. Who's the vice president? Clueless. And who's your state senator? I mean, your U.S. senator. Nobody knows. 2 senators. Who's your congressman? People don't know. And that's one of the problems we have. They don't know what's happening in the country. So sometime during high school, doesn't have to be, they can do it when you're doing the regular, supposedly, doing their civics course. They have to pass the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service test, which is the test that if you want to become a citizen, you have to take. So the whole idea is you should know the same things that immigrants come in that learn have to be a citizen, become a citizen. Another one, HB 349, relative to certification requirements for a school nurse. We did away with the requirement. Through 1 to 146. The thing is, some years ago, they put in all these requirements for what a school nurse had to have, the qualifications. The problem with that is some areas, like Manchester, for example, they were working on how to get around those requirements because we can't find people with those requirements. So in Manchester, they're using public service nurses because they have a public service department. Other towns are just renaming what they call, rather than school nurse, they're calling it something else. So what this does, let's leave it up to your school district to put qualifications on and who they want and what they want for a school nurse. For example, in some rural town up north, you would probably want higher qualifications for a school nurse than, say, Manchester. I mean, where immediate help services won't be available too soon. So let's leave it up to the school districts to get the best that they can get, because one of the problems is they can't in some places. So, and that's why it's so they're sort of messing that up. Here's one, HB 609, relative to innovation schools. This allows your school to create programs that, if they want to create them, they might want to bypass some of the regulations that the DOE has on how to do it, so they can get waivers from the DOE on maybe hiring somebody for a course that you can't get a teacher for. Like maybe automotive or something to that effect. You want to innovate. You want to do special courses similar to something like CTE, but you want to do it in your own district. and school. And so that just makes a little more flexibility for schools that want to, okay? And that was pretty much the last bill on because like I said, things started fooling around, so the rest of the bills didn't get done, but they'll get done in April or the end of this month. So yeah, they'll be the first things to happen on when we have another session. So let's see. Anything else I want to? I thought I pretty much covered most of these. Yeah. So with that, I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover on that. And so I also wanted to make a little comment on, I mentioned a little bit on what the New Hampshire Constitution says about the right to use force. But let's go back. I mean, maybe every show do a thing on our constitutional. And one of the things I thought we start with is freedom of speech. And we are guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution for freedom of speech. And I remember back in the 70s and 80s, people were deliberately trying to offend people with T-shirts with offensive statements. And if someone complained, it was freedom of speech. When a U.S. flag was burned, it was offensive, but freedom of speech. What happened? Now if somebody even says or prints the truth, someone yells, it's offensive, and it's no longer freedom of speech. What happened? But it appears to be one-sided. If a liberal says something, stops speech, burns the flag, it's okay, it's freedom of speech. And I find it somewhat amusing sometimes because Candace Owens, if you don't know who she is, look her up. She's been called a racist. She's black. But it depends on who says it. And, so anyway, there's a big problem. You should be able to say what you want. If I look at it this way, if it offends somebody, it's their problem. You can't offend me. I don't care what you say. Because I grew up in the age when it was sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt me. And so I look at it, somebody says something that's supposed to be offensive to me, I'll just say, who's it coming from? So anyway, let's stop this offensive bit and move on. So anyway, with that, I think we'll close this show, and hopefully the next show we'll have more bills to go over, and some bills that what was happening in education this week, and we're going to be executing a lot of the bills next week. One of my bills that I put in for your town clerk when the state rep registers to run for office, the town clerk that day emails the Secretary of State rather than normally it takes 4 or 5 days for the mail to get there, and then you don't know if anybody else is running. So that bill passed. So my 130, that's going to committee. I mean, it passed out of committee. HB 135 passed out of the committee. We'll see what happens with that. I'll be fighting that this week. So anyway, I want to thank you for listening and watching, and see you next time with what's happening up in Concord. Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.